right, so this is a presentation on cloud cost optimization. And Kurt and I are from Kansas State University, Division of Information Technology. Kurt is an application architect, and I'm the Director of Enterprise Server Technologies here within the division. Chat Conference 2021. All right, so we've got a lot of detail in these slides. We're definitely not going to go through it all, but if you want the presentation afterwards, feel free to reach out to us. The main goal of this presentation is to show you how many options there are to save money on your cloud bill. And this is not the end all be all list, but it's a list that we've refined over the last 6 months, and it has worked for us to develop a mature, I feel like a mature cost optimization process. And why do we do this? Well, of course, it's to really keep our CFO away and let us continue these migrations. What the fear is if this spirals out of control due to neglect, then we're going to really be limited in what we can do in the cloud. And so to drive more innovation, to drive more adoption and migration, we need to be prudent in managing those costs. Okay, so really right now we're in the struggle of time when we have both on-prem infrastructure and cloud migrations we're trying to drive. So we're kind of at that peak. If you look at the graph here, Y2, Q1, Y2, Q2, Q3, we're actually trying to replace our data center hardware that was damaged over 2 years ago in the Hale Library fire as well. So this is quite the challenge, but I feel like that we're up to the task. The main point here is as you drive optimization, architecture changes for your applications, and you're careful about the migration, ultimately that will pay off in the long run, or you can get to a point where your cloud costs will ultimately be lower than your on-prem costs were. And we've proven this with total cost of ownership analysis we've done for a few applications, that ultimately we do see it being cheaper in the long run. So the key to this is be curious, dig in, question everything. Something valuable that you identified last month may not be valuable anymore. You know, you always want to go for the lowest hanging fruit. Approach your peers that are in the space, developers, system administrators, cloud engineers, people that are driving this migration. Approach them in a way that's non-threatening. You're not placing blame on prior architectural decisions. You really just want to be open to new possibilities. Definitely don't punish mistakes. Give people the confidence to take risk. Risk, of course, in a measured sense, but to take risks, to learn, to try new things. Definitely use tags. I'm going to say tags multiple times in this presentation, but use tags and empower your staff to make decisions. Like I said, stay on top of things. Keep documentation. Be ready to speak about your successes every chance you get. Motivate people to join the team. That's sometimes some of the hardest in this journey is getting people on board, getting them to take part and to be a part of this cloud journey or our cloud strategy. Okay, Kurt's going to take over now.
Well, thanks, Greg, for the introduction. And I wanted to add just another contextual point, and that is we're really focused on AWS. That's where the majority of K-State's resources are living in the cloud. But as we look at some of the specific tools and options, you'll find similar or equivalent kinds of things in Azure or Google's GCE. So hopefully that doesn't turn you off if that's not where you're primarily putting your cloud resources. And I guess as an ontology, there's we can look at things that are automated, that we put in place, and then there are things that we do manually to engage in cost optimizations. So this slide is about the automated things, and within that, there's two types of automations that we can create. There are those things that can notify us of potential cost savings. These are things that wouldn't be covered by existing tools or features within those tools that AWS provides in our case. And then the other type of automation are um, having some action be taken on your behalf to save money. And before even mentioning any of these examples, what we really want to stress is that you don't recreate the wheel. Don't start with an empty file in your editor, your development IDE, to really look to see if there's something out there that's pretty close to whatever it is that you're wanting to do. And we're currently utilizing AWS's Lambda, so that way we're not having to manage any of the infrastructure to run that code. So just a couple examples. So for instance, you can tag some resources, maybe they're test resources that don't need to be running during the night. And so you can have a Lambda function go ahead and shut down those resources in that account with that particular tag to save you money. And or like in the case of notifying us, uh, we may need to review certain RDS snapshots, database snapshots, after a certain amount of time and certain other criteria. I guess next slide. And there's a general process that we go through. Sometimes it takes a few minutes, and other times it may take months, but it really starts with identifying that opportunity to save us money. But key for us is that we document everything, even if we're going to quickly notify the operational team that we want to make this change and execute on it. It's just important that we track these changes. But in most cases, we don't, we're not in a position to immediately move to execution because we may need to talk with others, or it may take more investment than just a few minutes to act on cost optimization that we've identified. And so it's just something to keep in mind. That's just a loose set of things that we go through as we engage in cost optimizations. Next slide. So this is a slide that we stole from the FinOps Foundation. And especially as your institution begins to engage in cost optimization, you want to focus on the low-hanging fruit, the stuff that isn't going to take a lot of your time or your team's time to execute on, but have high savings. And typically, if you haven't spent much time engaged in cost optimizations, there's going to be a lot of low-hanging fruit. And then as you chew through that, and you're going to move more towards higher effort, lower savings. But as time progresses and there's additional migrations, it seems like there's always something low hanging every month that we can go after. So don't be surprised if things continue to pop up that are low hanging fruit. Any other remark on this particular slide, Greg, that you'd like to make?
Yeah, for the folks that are familiar with Amazon, some of the things in the bottom right would definitely be reserved instances for RDS, of course, and then savings plans. We don't typically use RIs for EC2 instances. We typically find that the savings plans offer just as much savings with a lot less restrictions on instance families and those selections, and having to really know those up up front and how long you're going to be able to reserve that for, we find savings plans are much more effective.
Next slide. So the best place often to start in identifying cost optimization is to look at the bill very closely and look. We find that to find the low hanging fruit, you're most likely to find that by looking at the highest dollar items first, and then allow your curiosity to lead you on a journey on investigating, well, why is this? Or, does this really make sense given, our understanding of what the business is and how that particular service is being used? Um, but it's just a matter of having that curiosity, not just letting your eyes gloss over every time you pull up the bill, but to try to go in with a fresh set of eyes and genuine curiosity, and to be willing to look at the bill across time to see where there might be um, growing usage that can drive questions, and begin an investigation on why that might be, or whether there's an opportunity to do something different. And the other thing I guess I wanted to mention too about the bill is that, at least with AWS, I don't know about the other providers, but they show you the bill usually up to about 24 hours. So you see how services are accruing charges. And so I find it's important to look at the bill at least twice a month, usually about mid-month, because if something's going wrong, you're going to see it. Usually enough time has accrued, and then towards the end of the month, because that makes it much more comparable to previous months. Um, and then, as far as on this slide, one of the keys to cost optimization is knowing what's going on in your environment, being able to look at the charges and to relate that back to usage, um, and to see what's actually instantiated, and to confirm your understanding on why we're accruing charges in a certain way or at a pace that we're currently accruing. The other thing that's helpful to keep in mind is that AWS and the other providers are constantly adding new features and new service offerings. And it's helpful to look at these announcements with a cost optimization perspective, because it may create opportunities to re-architect, or it could be something very simple. Like here recently, we realized that by shifting to GP3 from GP2, which is just a particular, it's really just a billing difference, better cost for performance on our EBS volumes. We realized that we could save a lot of money by transitioning everything from GP2 to GP3. And we only became aware of that because we pay attention to AWS's announcements. And it just takes time to look through those and just look at what the pricing is for some of these different features and new service offerings. And the other thing is to continue to look at the console, see what's actually instantiated, what's actually set up, and to keep an eye on if something has, for instance, been left running, or maybe there was a prototype that was set up as part of a project, and having enough awareness that, hey, wait, we're already moving on in the project that should be disposed of.
Yeah, Kurt, on that point, real quick, I want to jump in. And how do you build the awareness? Well, one, we have a cloud sprint planning meeting on Tuesday of every week. And then Wednesday and Thursday, we have basically a stand up to go through what's going on. So that's what helps build that awareness. What prototypes are currently being tested out, or what migrations are being worked on. So that's how I don't know if we've mentioned that in another slide, but I wanted to bring it up.
Yep. Um, so probably the most salient point here is that there are many, 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 many tools to assist you in identifying cost optimizations. We're going to look at a number of them that are AWS specific, but there should hopefully be equivalent in other cloud offerings. I don't really have too much else to say about that. So one of the easiest tools to utilize in AWS is the trusted advisor. The little caveat is that you do have to pay for business level support or more in that particular account to have access to the cost optimization recommendations. Um, the other thing to be aware of is that this tool and many of the others, there can be a lot of noise and false positives. So you can't just rely on the recommendations as a list of things to chew through at some future point in time. And a perfect example with the trusted advisor is that oftentimes it will make a recommendation to shut down or terminate EC2 instances because they're underutilized. But this tool doesn't take into account uh, memory, what's actually being utilized. And just because of the way AWS structures their EC2 instance types, um, sometimes we're in a position where we have to choose a larger instance size just because of the memory, not because of the CPU. So that can generate some false positives. And then sometimes there's a business reason why we have to have something running that is waste, but it often comes down to that it's probably not a cloud native application, and we're not at a point to re-architect it in a way that would reduce utilization. Um, so a great tool that we've gotten a heads up. So it's great if you're going to look at the bill a couple of times a month, but if something is going to go off the rails, you probably don't want to wait till mid-month to discover that. And AWS Budgets is a nice tool that allows you to um, use your understanding about the business, previous costs and usage, and to set up some maximums that you think are reasonable um, for particular services or on the aggregate, and to notify one or more people that something has gone wrong. And most of the time, we'll get an alert because we're engaged in some type of new migration or we're starting a new project, and that's fine. But we have got notifications, hey, something's wrong, we need to look at this ASAP before costs balloon and we find ourselves in a pickle.
Yeah, who can find the Where's Waldo on this screen?
um,
Hardy, hardy, hardy.
So one of the other tools that I like in principle is AWS's cost anomaly detection. It's fairly new. It's their machine learning um, based tool that tries to look at usage, and if there's anything that looks odd, quote unquote, it can alert you that there is suspicious changes to your cloud usage. This, I would say, is not overly mature at this point. It generates a lot of false positives. On the other hand, it helps to drive some curiosity. So if you're not really sure where to look and you've been on AWS for at least a few months, for it to have data to work with, it can help drive some of these. Well, why is the usage on this particular service increasing? But it has saved us once for sure, and it's very easy to set up, and you can kind of set your threshold for when you would want to be notified, so you don't end up with too many false positives. So the other tool that I probably use the most, and I suspect is the true uh, for Greg, when we look to uh, commit a certain dollar amount for a certain amount of savings, there can be quite a bit of manual effort that would be involved in keeping track of that. And AWS has a tool, the Cost Explorer's right sizing recommendation, that can help you evaluate on a per instance basis on how we might want to um, change our utilization to better um, match how we're using it. I'm not saying that well. Do you want to try summarizing that differently?
Well, so is this how you did the T3 to T3A recommendation? Is that what they?
Yeah. So it's a starting place on trying to reevaluate on a per compute instance. You know, this is the
Yeah.
current size. This is what they think it is, but again, it doesn't take into account memory. So it can save you some time. And if there's anything that's grossly different in what the current size is versus the recommended, this can be a helpful tool for trying to identify some low-hanging fruit.
Because we do try to be slim on the resources we provision out in the cloud. Unlike on-prem, we've used tools like VROPS. VMware has a tool, and then Turbonomics to try to right size before we do migrations. Um, I would say that we do try to under provision in the beginning, and then provision up or grow it as we see fit or we see a performance need. So
Yeah. And the good thing too is that sometimes if we're not sure, we can start off a little too small and then increase it if we find that there's a problem through testing, or hopefully not in production, but if it does happen in production, it doesn't take much to shut down the machine, change the size, and then bring it back up. And if it's in a clustered configuration, then there may not be any downtime to the end user. So clustered systems oftentimes are a little bit easier to uh, lean on being too lean. And if there's a problem, then we can go ahead and increase the size. But anyway, this tool just gives you another perspective that's probably a little more helpful than Trusted Advisor, but it's just targeted really at EC2 instance sizes.
yeah, Kurt, we got about 6 minutes left.
Great. Um, so this particular tool, the savings plan recommendations, is we tend to look at this whenever there's an opportunity to save an additional $200 a month. And we can take in light what changes or what's being migrated to the cloud. Oftentimes we're looking at saving 30 to 40% off of usage. And it's very simple. And depending on what you're, whether you're willing to have, oh, wait, we have till 2:40, Craig.
Oh, we do. Okay.
Yeah, I was mistaken. I thought we only had 30 minutes. So
Okay.
that's
Perfect.
why I was going a little bit more detail than you probably expected.
Okay.
Okay,
Proceed.
but I still have to be mindful not to consume too much time. But this really is probably the biggest and easiest place to save money, because a lot of the hard analysis on, if you commit to this amount, either 1 year upfront or 3 years or whatever you're willing to do, it will help you figure out what the cost savings are. And then you can easily see, whether you want to commit to that based off of what's happening with migrations or your current operating environment.
Yeah, we typically do no upfront, um, 1 year savings plans on a 30-day rotating past analysis. In the beginning, when we moved our ERP systems out there, we did do a 3 year no upfront. And then most previous, the last savings plan we did, at least for RIs, we did do a partial upfront. So you're gonna prepay half of the amount, and you get a little bit better savings or discount from that.
Um, this tool in particular, the Cost Explorer, pairs very well with looking at the bill. The Cost Explorer allows your curiosity um, to run wild and to slice and dice the bill and to look at how changes or how costs are changing over either on a daily or monthly. And it's highly configurable. You can create reports from this so you can come back to them at a later time. Um, and visualizing changes in cost is a quick way to grab everyone's attention, especially if it's unexpected based off of current projects or
So yeah, we just wanted to list out some of the big bang or low hanging fruit optimization ideas we've actually been able to execute on. So probably a little bit better context that we should have said, Kurt, was we brought in Amazon for an 18-week migration readiness planning project. And I don't know, they had probably 7 to 8 badged Amazon employees that came out and really helped us work through this, helped us set up a multi-account tenant where we have basically a main account or a payer account, and then say our audit, our prod, our dev, our sandbox, all those live underneath. So we actually pay in the top account and it filters down. So yeah, turning on lifecycle management, making sure that we're tearing off data that is not needing to be accessed. So we send out our Commvault backups, and our Commvault backup uses S3 in the cloud, and so we can use S3 IA to tier that off. So it's a much cheaper way to do the 45-day retention that we need. Dropping unattached EBS volumes, turning off things that no longer need to be running. There's just so many things. And the key to this is really documenting those, because those things they catch attention in isolation, but when you can provide a report to your IT leadership of how positive this process has, how successful it's really been, that really captures their attention. And it proves to them that you're being responsible with these funds. So making sure that every idea that we have gets recorded. And then at the end of the month, or at the end of the year, you can provide that documentation of what was done, where it was done, how much it saved.
the other thing I was going to mention too about documenting it, there's some cost optimizations that we know we want to do at some future point, but it may take, maybe 6 months or maybe even a year before we feel that it's worth it, even if it's worth, $500 a month. Maybe it's just not a good time right now because we'd rather prioritize migrating more stuff to the cloud as opposed to going after additional cost savings.
Okay, and then we're going to wrap up the three remaining steps on this page here. Just remember, you can't do everything. You have to prioritize, and that's a real key thing. Set goals and action items. At K-State, we meet monthly to go through this process. So the prep work to that is typically Kurt's been doing this responsibility lately, but going through and generating optimization ideas and then documenting those. We We developed optimization ideas in our cloud stand-ups as well. So what we do at that optimization meeting is we go through the previous goals for the previous month, determine what has been done, what still needs to be done. Is there any roadblocks to accomplishing those ideas? And then we set goals for the current month, and then we assign those and give people ownership to take action and make them happen.
One
Um,
thing,
Go ahead.
one thing I was going to mention too, when we identify cost savings, occasionally we'll encounter an idea or an option, but it's difficult for us for some reason to come up with the exact cost savings. So we just ballpark it, or if there's uncertainty, and especially we think it's low hanging fruit, we'll commit to making that and then monitor it
Yeah.
to make sure that we're getting the cost savings. Otherwise, if there's a financial risk, we'll be prepared to roll that back. So um, don't let uncertainty necessarily stop you from going after something.
Okay, so some of our successes, even though we do not have an individual dedicated to this, and so we do have a job description for a cloud economist that we'd like to take over this role and really own it. We've been quite successful. So, for instance, in 2020, we had a savings of almost $46,000, and that doesn't take into account that if we were able to execute on a $1,000 per month cost saving idea in January, that we record the 1,000, not the 12,000 that we would have saved year or month over month. And if you lose control of a resource, don't be afraid to ask for a mulligan. We had a partner that had a backup process that really got out of control and burned through a lot of cash, and we are able to work with them to go to Amazon and ask for a do-over. And you don't want to do that all the time, but every once in a while, Amazon will forgive you for that mistake, and you just want to make sure you get it fixed moving forward.
And to hopefully detect it as soon as possible.
Exactly. So the lessons learned we have here, and I'll leave the vendor one for last, but always go after the lowest hanging fruit that has the most value. Avoid being penny wise and pound foolish. Don't just chase small ideas because you can do them. Make sure that the value is there and we have resources and the priority to do it. We do mention the staying up with announcements, and we specifically mentioned the T3 Intel processors for instance types. We have a lot of those from our early adoption of the cloud. But recently, we started moving to T3As, which are the AME, AMD processors. And more recently, there was an announcement for the Graviton or T4G processors. So those, for performance, they're really knocking it out of the park, and it is much more cost effective to go that route too. So that's something we're going to be evaluating. Tagging, tagging, tagging. Make sure that you're tagging everything. If you don't, you're going to have problems attributing costs to running your services. And so I gave the example of the total cost of ownership analysis that we did for a few applications in containers versus native EC2 instances versus our VMware on AWS implementation versus on-prem. And that's all due to being able to effectively tag. Kurt, anything else you want to add?
One thing I'd mention is that all the sub accounts under the payer account. Sometimes it might be helpful to have an account to help track those costs for some particular thing, but try not to have too many accounts because there's additional overhead for every account that you have. So if you are separating that out so it's easier to track things, make sure that it's actually worth it.
Yeah, and then on that key point, one of the keys here is Kurt mentioned business support. So business support for each account is a percentage of your total bill. So that will grow and shrink based on what you spend. So the reason why we have that payer account at the very top level is because there's no spend in that account. So if you have your if you purchase your RIs in your savings plan from the payer account, that's not going to affect your business level support. Does that make sense? So if you commit to say $10,000 of a savings plan, but if you purchase that in your prod account, right off the bat, you're going to be paying $1,000 of business level support for just that savings plan. So that's why it makes sense to separate that out into a payer account, um, and not pay support on your RIs or savings plans. So with that, we are open for questions. And we are always open. If you want to reach out to our emails there, I have them posted and I'll post them in the chat. If you'd like us to maybe help generate some ideas on how to tackle this at your own institution, we'd be happy to do that.
Oops. If anyone has any questions, feel free to place those in the chat and we'll see if these guys can take care of that.
"42 participants. That's pretty good.
Yeah, that's the most I've seen in any of the ones I've done so far.
I think the other thing, as a really general thing that we found, is that it kind of takes the right set of skills um, to really excel at this. You can't just be a business accounting type person, and you can't just be technical. You kind of have to have a mindset in both worlds.
Kurt, this is exactly what I was going to ask you. So what would be the qualifications of a person in this role? And then the other thing is, I mean, have you met anybody that does this now?
Well, I haven't met anyone who does this just as their profession. I know they're out there. It would be awesome to talk to them. I know Greg follows at least a couple of people on some social media. But as far as qualifications, I think part of it is being technically minded, willing to understand and dive into the technical details about what's currently being used, understand the context about why these services are being used and which projects they're connected to.
Yeah, and my wife says that you have to be frugal. She uses cheap, but you have to like to do it. Like,
Yes,
it pains me to see how much we spend on our bill every month, and I want to attack it every single month. And it takes that passion, that drive to want to do it, because it is tedious, monotonous work, and you have to keep up with it. Otherwise, it'll spiral out of control.
yeah. I would say also that, everyone has talent. Talent isn't necessarily just Michael Jordan kind of talent, but the person who probably excels in this genuinely gets a sense of joy when they go, oh, wow, I can save the institution, $5,000 a month just on this one particular thing if we can execute on it. And then when we do, you get a real sense of joy from that. And I think that creates the motivation to keep having that curiosity, to keep looking.
Mhm.
Otherwise, your eyes are just going to glaze over, looking at the bill.
Yeah. So Waldo asked, what's their timeline for accelerating our savings? So I think we're to the point where we have, we're on top of our eyes, we're on top of savings plans. We're able to get the big chunks of savings. Right now, I think we're probably looking at architecture changes, major architecture changes for our applications and how we host them in Amazon. So we've done a few with auto scaling plans. We use cloud formation, um, just being able to grow and shrink on demand. I think that's really the next step. I think containers is a big part of it. The just re-architecting our applications. I think that's the next big leap that we have. And I would say that we probably got another 6 months before we can realize those savings.
And for context, a lot of organizations, including K-State, a lot of the cloud migrations are just lift and shifts because you don't have the time to make them cloud native. And
Yep.
so that's what helps drive some of future cost optimization projects is through.
So Jason has asked, have you had any workloads that you transitioned back on-prem, and why? I can't think of one. I don't know, team, help me out here from K-State if we have had any. So right after the fire, we moved HRIS out. And so there was a thought that we would eventually bring HRIS production back on-prem. And then we got this report about our hardware in its current state. And then it was just like, nope, we're going to charge to the cloud. That's when we developed our cloud first strategy. And really from there, we haven't looked back. So I did mention that we are replacing some on-prem hardware in 2 of our data centers. That hardware is now half the size, probably less than half the size of what it was previously. It's half the cost. And so there's a 5-year timeline to, I don't want to have to replace another data center in 5 years. I want everything to be out in the cloud. And I think the technology that's available to you, the innovation, I don't think we look back from this point and say, does it cost too much? Did we make the right choice? I think if you're not in the cloud now, you will be in 5 years.
Any other questions? Still have a few minutes left if anybody needs to ask a question.
Maybe we can make the final few minutes interactive. If anybody wants to share what they've done in the cloud, are they seeing the benefits that we are? If anybody wants to share that. I will add that, I did mention that we're trying to re-architect our applications and go with containers. If there's any universities out there that are doing this right now, we would love to take an opportunity to meet with you and talk through your process and what direction you're going, what vision you have for applications on your campuses. And I'll get the.
And if you wouldn't mind putting your contact info in the chat, just for anybody who didn't get it off the slide.
Just gonna do that.
Thank you.
Well, this has been fun. Thank you for joining us today. Oh, that's not it.
Yeah, thank you both for sharing and for presenting this. This was really good. Obviously something that's pretty sought after by the large number of people that attended.
Yeah, and the offer's there. We'll work with anybody. That's the great thing about higher education is everybody's willing to share and talk through how they do things. And there's just always that culture of improvement and self-reflection. So it's great.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. We've got one more presentation coming up at 3 o'clock. So that's the last presentation of Check, last presentation of the day and of Check. So you have a 15-minute break until then, and we'll see you there.
Thanks, Chris. Great job.
Thank you, Greg and Kurt.